What's going on? You're looking really nice in your new acid top there, champion.
I know, mate. It's really good. I don't know if it's the right choice though. Came out this morning, I'm like, oh, it's a bit cold.
In Oz, freezing.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, it's just the nights and the mornings, just been
right.
cold. So I think it's that change is happening, but the day's been pretty good.
Oh, dude. Well, I tell you what, I'll be the first to announce that we've got some sun in Vancouver. Unbelievable. So, yeah, I'm pretty stoked. Good morning, team. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I just firstly want to apologise for being slightly late. It was for good reason. We were having an immense conversation in our women's mastermind, and it was not fair that we cut that conversation off. So yes, I do apologise, guys. Sorry, I'm a little bit late, but hopefully we can make it up with solving some shit today. We're going to kickstart this in 2 minutes. What's going on? Hello, Lapo. Good morning, brother. I hope you're good, and good morning,
Morning,
Tara.
Lapo.
Guys, say good morning and good afternoon and good evening in the comments. So we've got 10 people watching this live, and we're going to start in 90 seconds. Hello, Ash. How are you? Uh, Brother, I want to apologise for our inability to meet up in the final days. It's like, as soon as you become a dad,
Oh no.
it's like,
Yeah,
all the time go, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but we're there. Hello, Hamo. How are you, bud? Hello, gentlemen. I don't know who's saying that, but I love you anyway. Good morning. We are going to have to hopefully come up with a solution here to be able to continue streaming beyond April 22. So it's
Yeah.
like, what's this Sunday? So Facebook's going to cut us off from using our streaming software. So we're going to need an alternative, but all good. Hello, Glenny boy. How are you, mate? Guys, we are starting in 30 seconds. Now, I'll just let you know if you have any questions that you want to ask into the comments, please do so. I think this is a good topic that we're going to discuss here. And if there's anything you're kind of like, oh, like I got this niggle, I got this injury, then if we don't do it in the podcast, we can answer it after the podcast and we can go deep. Okay? So I think we are ready to rock and roll. You ready, big dog?
Yeah, brother.
All right, let's go. On the count of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Welcome back to the Better Body Academy podcast. This is the podcast that you come to when you're sick of the dumb diets and unsustainable workout programs. This morning, this afternoon, or this evening, whatever it is for you, I'm joined by my best boy and coach, Troy, who is our Better Body Academy rehab specialist and general good-looking man. Happy Friday, pal. How are you?
Happy Friday. How was
All
how
right,
was your
so
flight home, mate?
the flight was disgustingly long, but the kids behaved. So yeah, Troy's putting out flight back to Canada this morning or last night or whatever it was. Anyway, we're here, we're safe, and we're ready to kickstart this podcast. So let's go. So, guys, we frequently get the question, doctor told me not to do X exercise because of Y injury. Now, typically, in 80% of cases, doctor told me not to squat because of my back. Okay? So I had a conversation, albeit brief, with Troy yesterday and just said, look, I think we should discuss this topic. Now, I think we should also point out that we are not doctors. Okay? And it is important that you hear the conversation and then speak to said doctor about what the implications of what we've discussed here so that you can have a more global conversation. The reality is, most doctors are not trained, they're not physical therapists. Now, in addition to that, half the doctors on the planet are in terrible damn shape. So I don't know about you, but I wouldn't take optometrist advice from someone with no eyes. Silly example, but my point is that there's probably a line here where legally you have to we have to kind of suggest that you obey doctor's orders, but at the same account, there may be some grey room here, and this is what I wanted to bring Troy in because Troy is far more qualified to speak on this as someone who is has done plenty of rehab in his time and dealt with clients in person who've suffered injuries and no doubt would bring forward this conundrum. True of that, Troy?
Yeah, definitely true, mate. There's yeah, like you said, with a lot of the doctors, they're straight to just stop doing everything. They're in the essence of, it's got to heal itself, everything like that. But the big thing with it is when we stop doing something, like with the muscles and everything like that, we stop using it, we lose it. We That is actually true. And like what you're saying, if you do feel like it's something worse than just like muscular, go see a specialist. So as Jay said, we are not specialists. Go and see one to understand where things are coming from, so then you know how to come at it.
So when you say go and see a specialist, what does that mean?
Mm.
What's a specialist?
So a specialist is a specialist in that area for what your injury is. So if I have, say, a back injury, I'm going to see a specialist surgeon um, that deals with that kind of injury. That's what their line of work is. If I'm going to someone else that, like a doctor, like a GP, they don't know the ins and outs fully of what that consists of, what the actual treatment is, what the rehab side of things is. So specialists, that's all they do. So
Right.
everyone has an area of where they specialize in.
Yeah, so I didn't know if you meant like specifically go to like a physio, a chiro, something down that line, or you're
So
or
similar because physios and stuff like that, they are specialists. They are specialists in that field.
right.
So when it comes to muscular, skeletal, things like that, they're specialists in that area.
Okay. So the
Yeah.
advice to
So
start
physios are part of that.
so the advice to start is maybe just accepting what your GP tells you at the start is not
Yeah.
necessarily the greatest advice because they're a generalist. So
Yeah.
go down the line of asking for a referral of someone who specializes in a certain part or a physio or something that's more towards the allied trades of physical therapy, manipulation, etc. All right, so
Yeah.
this is a difficult conversation to have. The reason it's a difficult conversation here is because what we're basically asking is when it comes to movements, compound, and the two that tend to stick out are deadlifts and squats. Does the benefits of those movements outweigh the potential danger or negatives of those movements? Or is there value in doing those exercises or is the risk too high? Now, the reason that I see this as a difficult conversation is because it's not as simple as just giving general advice to everyone because there's so many variables. Those variables might include, well, what is your actual injury? Do you have a bad back or do you have a disc which has been fused in your back? There's probably a little bit of difference. How severe is the actual injury? Is the injury an acute injury which just needs some rest, or is it a chronic back or shoulder or hip injury? How skilled are you in executing the movement that we're talking about, the squat or the deadlift? And what weight would you be lifting? Are you talking about going and like trying to lift PRs with a chronic back injury? Or are you talking about just doing the movements? So these are the concerns. Troy, how do we have this conversation? How do we start? Can we talk about firstly what are the actual benefits of doing squats and deadlifts from a top level? Like what are the actual benefits of those movements?
So the benefits of those is because they're multi-hinge, so compound movement, they're hitting not just one uh, muscle, um, one joint, anything like that. So they're really good in that aspect. They can do a full body. They bring it in a lot of muscle. So um,
So that's a good thing from a
that's where
time saving perspective. It's an efficient way to
a
train.
time saving, yeah, you can sort of get in. You can do um, like if you are time poor. But the other biggest thing too is they're movements that we do in life the most. We're always up and down. We're always squatting to get down to a chair. We're getting into a car. lifting something off the ground.
Mm,
They're the movements that we do the most.
mm.
So
So
they're the
the
movements
two
that we
movements
need to get
being
strong at.
the squat movement where you're bending particularly from the knees, and the
Yeah.
deadlift movement where you're hinging at the hip. You can imagine, like you said, getting into a car or bending over to pick up something on the floor. They are two movements that are fundamental to being a human. Okay, so there's efficiency. There is the fact that they mimic normal human movement. Like, what are the other values that are kind of about these compound movements that are important?
So they also hit, you've got smaller supportive muscles.
Right,
And because we are moving those joints, we are actually strengthening those smaller muscles as well because they have to come in board for stability,
right,
things like that. So if we're not, because most exercises and a lot of them are just isolation and they're just focusing on that one thing. But because of these movements being compound, they are hitting all these different joints, which brings in different ligaments and then the muscles that are supportive. So
right. Okay.
they're our biggest things is our supportive muscles.
So it would make sense then that the reason that they're so good is that they involve multiple joints, multiple hinges, also means that inherently they are riskier than doing a bicep curl, for example, which is literally just
Yeah,
hinging at the elbow. When you're moving
yeah,
three, four, five joints at once, that's what makes it more challenging and then inherently riskier.
yeah. So that's the biggest thing when it comes to those kind of movements because we're not just isolating one and we can just focus on that one hinge. We're bringing in multiple, so risk is higher. So then the biggest thing it comes back to the execution of it, and that's where most people have the problem.
Yeah, so that is my, I guess, to kind of point the question your way. My main concern about this, from a physical therapy point of view, is okay. Doctor tells me don't deadlift, don't squat. It sounds like sound advice if you had a knee injury or a back injury. That sounds like really sound advice. Like, don't do something that risks further damage. That makes sense to me. But the flip side to that is, as you said, the use it or lose it thing. Let's say that you have a back injury. Well, because these are real world movements, you can avoid deadlifts all you want in the gym, but then you go over and your kid drops something, or you need to pick your baby out of the cot, or you need to lift a suitcase onto the belt at the airport. And then what? What happens then? So is this a legitimate kind of concern, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Like if we're told to not do something because of that injury, like he just said, if we're not moving that area, then it's not going to actually heal right. Because we need to have that promotion of everything that's happening in our body to go and repair. And if we're not strengthening that up, we're just going to keep doing that same injury over and over and over and over again because we aren't doing the things that we need to do to strengthen it. If I have a knee injury, then I've got to strengthen everything up around it. So yes, initially I might not be able to do the movement that I can
Mhm.
for that thing, but I'm going to strengthen everything up so I can do that movement again. So yes, it might be okay to be told to say don't do a deadlift, but we got to know why can't I do that deadlift initially? What's the injury? What can I do to build up around that to get back to doing that?
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think it's a one line, don't stop doing it.
How Talk to me about why it's important. Like, why is it actually important from a holistic point of view to take a joint through the range of motion? Any joint,
So it,
despite whether it's a deadlift or a squat. Why is it actually
yeah,
important for the knee to go right through its full range of motion?
so all our joints, they have ligaments, muscles, they've got discs, they've got fluid like cases, everything like that. So, and for them to be healthy and strong, they need movement. That's what they're there for. So if we're not using it for what it's there for,
Mhm.
those things start to break down or get used up by other things. They might, little fatty cells can be promoted to them, which then restrict it
Right.
because we're not moving it.
Okay.
To keep
So
them healthy, we need to move.
yeah, I almost think of it like, even though it's not quite, it's just a good analogy. You imagine a door that doesn't open up properly to the full extent. It starts to creak. It starts to get dust. It starts to, and I think it's a
Yeah,
little bit
starts
like
to
that.
rust up.
Starts to rust up. Okay, so there's a phrase that says, pertaining to gym, there's no bad exercises, there's only bad execution or low skill of execution.
Yeah.
So so like, is it that the doctor perceives that the risk is, yes, I understand deadlifts and squats can be beneficial, but for the average person, their skill in performing such movements is low, that the risk outweighs the benefit. Is that the
Yeah,
theory?
and that's normally where they go to. So they look at it and go, that is a high knowledgeable sort of exercise where you really got to know what you're doing form wise to be able to do those movements
Mhm.
without getting hurt. And that's where they normally will go straight to will then just stop it. But the thing that everyone should be looking at is if that is giving me the most pain or um, when it comes to that injury, how can I do this different to still hit those muscles? So there's always a variance to anything. So say if I can't do a squat because of the weight on say a barbell on my shoulders there, then that's going to compress my spine and then that's might be giving me a lot of pain. Then I might change that instead of having the weight up here. If I just go down the suitcase squats, the compression of the spine's not going to be there
Right.
because the weight is not getting pushed down through my spine. They're down by my side. So
Mhm.
we can change those variances. We can still do the movement and we can still build that strength.
Okay,
But
so
we've got to see, yeah,
at the end of the day, it's the movement pattern that's important, but how you
yeah,
execute that movement
how
pattern
you execute it.
can be
Yeah,
variable. Okay, so
yeah.
would one be, I don't know if this is a good question to ask, but would one be better to do the squat or do the deadlift that they're being told not to do at a very low weight, or would one be better to come up with a substitute movement for the squat or the deadlift?
Yeah, so that's sort of it's a hard question to answer because of like say every injury is different. So if some injury is a bit more severe, then you might really need to break it back down to the start. Um, so say I'm doing a squat and then I've got some problems with my spine, then what I need to do is break it right back. And I might start by just doing some small little squats, like a quarter squat onto a bench or something like that. And then I'll work through my movement and then we can like rebuild that. But if the injury is not as bad, then we can break it down to why am I getting the pain? Where's the pain? What can I do to get away from that pain?
Mm,
Is there a different movement? So then there's that variance through that point there. So it's a hard one to answer because you don't know what the injury is.
yeah.
Um, but there's still no reason to stop doing things. You can break things back down and go, what is that movement? What can I do to help do that movement safely? What can I do to actually build the muscles around it as well? So I don't need to necessarily have to do, say, a squat, but I might go, okay, I'm going to really focus on building up my glutes, which is going to help me do a squat
Right.
in the future.
Yeah. So you're playing a
Yeah,
longer game. I like that.
I'm
I
playing
like
along there. Yeah,
that. Okay. So let's talk about those specific movements. If you, because I think something we haven't discussed here is that if you enter this is the unsaid thing. If you enter an exercise and you're not confident that you can perform it safely, then that's almost in your head, right? If
yeah,
you, and I'm thinking of Kev Grant here, who was the guy that asked the original question. It's like, if you're thinking that, oh my God, I'm going to go and do a deadlift and I'm going to injure my back, but I want to do what Troy and Jay said and still do it, you're almost like that's in the back of your mind and probably your form's going to be
It's
compromised.
usually what's going to happen.
It's usually what's going to happen. Okay, so
Yeah.
a couple of questions. Is there any benefit, again, with the fact that we don't understand an individual's individual injury? Is there any benefit to doing substantially sub max weights? So, for example, let's say you're a strong guy, but you've got a back injury and you can squat 100 kilos. Is there any benefit to doing 40, 50 kilogram squats where you don't think that there's that risk?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah, there is massive benefit because we're still putting it under load.
Okay,
We're teaching our body to go through those movements under load.
right.
And that's with like progression is we don't go straight away and just go straight into doing our heaviest thing. We do warm up.
Right.
So we will warm the body up before we get to do the movement and then we go and do it.
Okay.
It's the same with that as well. If we have an injury, we can just scale it back and reteach those muscles to and then slowly build them back up. So we can go back and then just reteach ourselves.
And I guess that means looking at what are the important metrics of that lift. As an example, is this lift simply that I've got this injury and I'm trying to build muscle? Or do I value the importance of having mobility through that joint as well? If you value the ability to have mobility through that joint, then whether you're doing it with 100 kilos or 10 kilos, if you're getting the joint through the full range of motion, you might not be able to load it up. You might not max out the hypertrophy or muscle building benefits, but you're going to get the range of motion, which is probably the highest
Yeah.
value part of this, right?
Yeah, yeah, because it's getting that movement in there, which slowly you will get stronger naturally with it because you're building those smaller muscles that
Right.
are the supportive structure to our
Okay.
skeletal. So that there is massive benefits.
Okay. Can we talk about probably your top three, 2 to 3 substitute movements? And I know it's going to vary a little bit, but what are the best substitute movements for someone that has some back issues and feels that squats and deadlifts are not great? Let's talk about squats first. Are there a couple of good ones that come up you think that are a good substitution?
Yeah, so like when it comes to squats, for the majority of people, it's usually having the barbell. That's usually the problem.
Right.
So most people that can't do squats because of the barbell, they can do squats with dumbbells.
Okay.
Um, I would be still going through those movements. I would be going into box squats.
Okay.
So then you have got that support there behind you.
Box squats
Um,
with a barbell.
no, just with dumbbells by your side.
Right.
You could even do like a goblet squat, just holding it on that front, but still having that support there. Because the most thing for most people is they need to have that support, especially if they have got a spinal injury.
Okay.
They need to have that support if there is a failure.
Okay.
So I'd be going into box squats.
Okay.
Um,
So what about?
and then you
Sorry,
know,
can I jump in and ask?
yeah,
What about? I know that people want to say things like leg extensions, like a seated leg
yeah.
extension and a 45-degree leg press. Are they good substitutes or not really?
They can be. Um, it comes back to that injury because sometimes with the injuries it comes back to flexion and extension of your spine,
Right.
especially when it comes to back injuries.
Okay.
And if we go into a leg press and it's coming back into us, we're going into a massive flexion when we're bringing those
Oh, right.
knees back towards us, and it can put
Okay.
pressure on to the
Okay.
disc.
Okay.
But they can be a good alternative
Okay.
um, for someone to try and get range.
Okay. And it might be true that you might need, for example, 2 movements to make up for the 1 movement of a squat, right? So
Yeah,
we might need to do perhaps a box squat. Maybe the box squat's a bit more complete, but if we're going to do something like a leg
yeah,
extension, we might want to pair that with, maybe a Romanian deadlift if that feels okay, or something to get the
yeah.
whole kind of leg.
Even something like a step up can work because we're still working the glutes. We still bring in your quads. They're the main things that are working when we do those movements, and we're still getting the hinge. We're still getting that movement through there. So,
Mhm.
and that comes back to, have you got range? Have you got problems in your knee? But they're ones that you can do that don't have that massive load
Okay.
on you as well.
Before I ask the next question, guys, if you do have any questions for the people watching live that you want to ask, please pop them into the comments and I can ask Troy now. So, what about the deadlift substitutes? Because a deadlift is
Yeah,
a kind of a pretty fundamental movement. The first thing that would maybe come to this is like, I think it would be substantially safer to move to a hex type bar first. Would you
yeah.
agree?
Yeah, yeah, that's where I'd go to first because of when the weight's in front, that can be the big problem because it's naturally pulling you forward.
Hmm.
If it's just straight by your side, then you can keep your spine in a neutral position.
Right.
So it's not about, so when we talk about neutral when it comes to spine, we're not talking about you just got to stay stiff. There's still going to be movement in your spine,
Uh-huh.
but neutral is when it's flowing together in that one motion. There's no massive curves.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay, so hex bar, which for anyone that doesn't
yeah,
know, it's the one that generally speaking looks like a hexagon and it has on the sides handles that you can drop down. So rather than the bar being in front like a conventional deadlift, the bar is at the side. Okay, any other suggestions as a replacement for deadlift?
I'd be going more towards the glute side of things when it comes to like glute bridges. You can do hip thrusts, everything like that, because it doesn't put the pressure
Right.
on there, but you're still getting, because it's that hip hinge.
Okay.
Um, that's the biggest force of movement when it comes to the deadlift. So I'd be working through your glute bridges on the bench, on the floor, depending on your level. And then I'll be working my lower back a little bit. So I'll be doing Supermans if people know what they are.
Uh-huh.
There's also one on the bench that you can do. It's called a frog raise. So you're on the bench flat with your legs off, and then you're actually lifting your legs
Yep.
up.
Yep.
Yep, and it's focused on that glute and those lower back.
Okay, we might need to get you to demo a couple of these in the gym for
Yeah,
the crew.
yeah, 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 for sure.
So two more questions that I want to ask, and if anyone's got any questions, please pop them in the comments. What about inverted commas less dangerous movements? So movements that aren't so multi-joint. Like for example, I don't know if I know any person that's over the age of 40 in the world that doesn't have some sort of shoulder injuries. Should you still try to train your shoulders, even if you're getting kind of impinged a little bit, either in, say, something like a front press or a side raise, and you get that pinching, that feeling? Like,
Yeah.
should you still try to train through that? Does the same kind of range of motion idea
It
apply?
sort of changes a little bit with the shoulder because the shoulder goes through a bigger range of motion.
Uh-huh.
Then when it comes to the building of the shoulder, the muscles are through that side. It's not technically just to go up that way. So most injuries is when we actually start to go up.
Right.
So yes, we can actually stop doing overhead things,
Uh-huh.
but we can still build this muscle
Right.
around it by not going up. So that's the difference with when it comes to the shoulder is we can stop doing overhead stuff.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then but we can do like lateral raises, front, rear delt, and we're still building that muscle to build strength to be able to lift something overhead if we need to.
Right.
Chest, that comes into it, back, that comes into playing, doing
Uh-huh.
shoulder raises.
Mhm. So just challenging you on this then, that specific thing, if the doctor said to you, or the I guess the physio said to you, just don't do any. I've heard that before. Don't do anything above your shoulders, above the kind of
Yeah,
plane of your shoulders. Is that
yeah.
sometimes good advice for people? I would have thought that
It
that.
is, yeah, it is good advice for people because of uh, the force that it does when you come up to here and the impingements that it can
Right.
happen back onto your spinal cord.
Right.
Um, so that's sort of the bigger reasons, but I would still be working into that, thinking of the movement. So I'd break it back down and go, okay, I can't go up right now. I'm going to still build my muscle, but I'm actually going to go through my movements. I'm going to get to the point where I can actually have my hand over my head without any pain,
Right.
and then I might be able to bring it back into it. So you can rework it
Okay.
depending on that injury.
Yeah, and so that was probably my final question is we're kind of very much like listening to this podcast, there's probably 40 or 50% of people that work on the tools. And then there's another 40-50% of people that, like me, mostly sit at a desk. And how that change of just not putting weight on the skeleton and the muscular system must be just causing so many problems on a global scale and injuries because people just aren't getting into those positions anymore, right? And so how
Yeah,
important is like I guess I'm coming back and asking you a leading question here. This is why we need to get in the gym. Because if we're not doing those movements in life because of our restrictions of our occupation, then you don't do that and then you go and do it in real life somewhere. If you don't do it in a gym, then where else are you going to get that stimulation from, right?
yeah, definitely. And I think that's the biggest thing is like the misconception of like going to the gym. It's about looking good and everything like that. That's a byproduct of it
Mm.
because we build the muscle as we're doing it and things like that. But that's not the main reason that we should be going to the gym. It's about building that structure for our body to be able to go and do the things that we actually love and want to do.
Mm.
So we need to build, we need to repair, we need to strengthen everything in our body so we can actually go and do the things that we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's the main thing.
Okay, I love this chat because if you can take anything out of this, guys, the big thing that I want to challenge here, and Troy nailed it, is he said, if you've been told you can't do something, then the instant thing that we need to be thinking about is, well, if you don't do it, then you lose it, right? Now, are we willing to risk losing it and not getting into that position, almost like wrapping yourself in bubble wrap and saying, well, I'm just going to avoid that all my life. But then if you're forced into that position by life, then you're going to be infinitely weaker. So our advice, I guess, if without putting words back into your mouth, our advice would be don't take the immediate advice. It's not to say that your GP is wrong, but a GP is not someone who is trained in human movement. That's not their specialty. They're a general practitioner. So we would suggest going to either a specialist in a specific area or going down the line of a trained human movement specialist like a physio who can actually look at your specific injury and give you a little bit more individualized guidance rather than just putting a line through everything. The benefits of these bigger compound movements are that they are life-based movements. They are efficient movements. They are energy demanding movements from a calorie perspective. So great for weight. And I could keep going. The point is that you don't want to just be taking the first level advice and just ruling everything out and then ending up possibly putting yourself into a worse situation than when you started. Any final points that you'd like to add, or does that wrap it up, brother?
That's pretty good. I'd also just say, yes, there's going to be times when you can't do that certain movement, but try and break down that movement and go, what else can I strengthen? What else can I do? What other like muscles am I working? What other exercises can I do to help those muscles?
Mm.
So then, if you do happen to do things in life, there is some support there.
Just think of yourself as an over 80-year-old man or woman. Like probably one of the biggest values that you could have would be your own mobility. That's it. If you've got mobility, you got a good quality of life. If you don't have mobility, your quality of life is shit. You're sitting in a seat and you can't do anything. That's horrible. You worked all your life to get to that position and you can't actually do anything. So this is why this is an important conversation. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast this morning. Hopefully this has been helpful to answer a few questions. Go up the chain, go to a specialist, go to a physio and get a little bit more individual advice. And then don't just think to yourself, oh, put a line through that. I'm never doing that again. This has been the Better Body Academy podcast. We'll stick around to answer any questions if there are, and we'll see you in the next episode. Peace. All right, team. So hopefully that was a complete enough discussion to answer the question. I think it's good because I think Troy's much better at helping to explain these things. So does anyone have any individual questions? We got someone said, I need to chat to Troy about using the hex because I can't use a straight bar as it puts too much pressure on my back. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, is there anything to
And
comment
that's
there?
exactly what we're talking about. Because the weight's in front, it's naturally going to move us forward. And if we don't have a lot of flexibility through our hinges, um, then our body's going to try and compensate. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when the pressure goes to our lower back.
Mm-hmm.
But by having that weight right next to you, our movement has to flow in that same because the weight's right there. Our
Mm.
movement usually flows to wherever the weight is,
Yes.
just naturally.
Yeah.
So when it's down by that side, it's good.
Okay, so that was Benny Bell. So Benny,
Yep.
feel free to reach out just on the success team so we can kind of give you some advice. We'll take it up with physio. Then, as GP said yesterday, no weights for 6 weeks. Yeah, and this is where we kind of went to at the start. There might be a kind of a acute advice is different from chronic advice. From a management
Mm,
perspective, you might have an acute injury where it's already inflamed, it's already swollen. Why would you go and rush back into the gym to put more weight and more sweat? Like, you
mm.
just wouldn't do that. That's not smart. But are we talking about that, or are we talking about this kind of niggling back or neck or knee or whatever it is pain where unless you're going to get a back replacement or a or a hip or knee replacement, then you're going to have to learn to get mobility through this joint, or what? Like, what's the alternative?
Yeah.
What's
And
the
I think
alternative?
with this question as well is a lot of people went it for exactly how it's worded. It's saying um, no weights for 6 weeks. A lot of people take that literally and they will just do nothing. The
Mm,
injury could be just in their shoulder where they just can't do any rotational thing. So they won't do anything.
mm. And then the weight comes
You
on.
can still do, yeah, you can still go and do stuff. So it's not about doing no weights at
Mm,
all.
mm.
It's what they're talking about is basically having no loaded weight
Yes,
on that injury. Um, you're still going to be doing some movement because naturally our body, if I'm just going through this motion, yes, I'm only doing a body weight, but I'm doing a body weight.
mm. Yeah, that's
And
what I was going
that's where
to say. So if
most,
yeah,
yeah,
for a lot of times, if you're, am I right in thinking that if an injury is there, sometimes body weight movements going through the range of motion are actually a good thing to stop like
good
the
thing.
stiffness building up.
Yeah, because like, when there is an injury, our body goes into that survival mode, and that's what it's there to do. It's to protect us. So things are going to tighten and everything like that. So that's where a lot of times that's where the injury is, and there could be a tear. So we have to lessen that load on that
Mm,
for it to heal itself. So just like that question, it's saying, they need to stop for 6 weeks.
mm,
That's to let that healing side of things phase, but we still need to have that connection through that nervous system
mm.
to be able to have that healing.
Makes
And
sense.
that usually comes from using it as well.
Makes sense. Now I don't know if this is a question. Scotty said neck nerve pain. Um, it's not really a question, but what do you do about something that's something when it feels like a pinch? Is there any solution to that? That's a good question. I don't know the
So
answer.
there is some like mobility things, movement, because a lot of times when it comes to nerve, it's being pinched by either skeletal or by muscle
Right.
pushing onto that nerve, and you need to like release it. So like massage, that can start to release it, but and
Mm,
then movement in the joints changing. So if I've got say neck and it's at that back there, then a lot of times what I do is I'll sort of rotate my shoulder
right.
inwards, drop that down, and then I'll come forward. And what I'm actually doing here is I'm releasing a lot of the pressure on through the nerves, and you'll feel a bit of a tingling
Right.
that will actually go down.
Yeah.
That's that's the sort of releasing of it. Yeah.
Dude, personal
So
question.
there is movement.
I've got that like going on now, and and
Hmm.
Katie Marples calls it tech neck. I'd never heard that term before, but that makes sense. Like you sit at a computer all day, everything's rounding forward.
Yeah, and yeah, and because there's something in front of you there, you naturally want to come forward
Yeah,
towards it.
yeah. So can
So
I show you
it
something?
pushes our spine.
Does
Yeah.
this allow me to? Can you see my screen or not?
Yep. Yep.
So she sent me this idea. All right, I want to. What are your like? I'm getting you off guard here, but the basic idea is this: that you're 10 minutes a day reduction of pain. And like for me, I was like a bit like feels a bit gimmicky. But is there something to be said there for putting your neck in
There's
that?
something. Yeah, there's something to be said for it because, but the only thing there is like you just got to see is that pushing my spine out of alignment more than what should be because everyone's individual with so
Mm,
it's not a like the thickness of that could be totally different for what you need.
right.
Um, the curvature in your spine could be so different. So that's the only thing with when it comes to those kind of things. Um,
So how what's the theory in this? Like what's the theory behind like
so
what is
most of the time, it's like because of the curvature, when we are like leaning forward through there, we
right,
start to get that roundness through that top part of our spine.
right.
And then what that is doing is it's basically trying to sort of push
Correct
that
that.
back into
Right.
a bit more of alignment. Yeah, so you can sort of do it yourself by pushing your chin back towards the wall. Um,
Okay.
that's one of the sort of more important ones. But then mainly it's working that back and posture,
Yeah, right.
and then like using a wall as your base, and then seeing what's touching, what's not,
You
and
want to
then get that
you want to
alignment.
see
But you'll be seeing,
you
yeah.
want to see a ripper sales pitch? Look at this. You ready? This is on their website. Neck cloud versus chiropractor.
A chiropractor.
So fucking good.
Yeah, right.
Oh, I love it. Anyway, dude, let's leave it there. Guys, hopefully this has been helpful in some way. Hope you're having a beautiful Thursday or Friday, whatever it is to you. We'll see you in the next episode.